Hey guys, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my journey today, kind of where I came from in my teaching career and how I've gotten to where I am in my dissertation and my doctoral journey. So I started out teaching in Electric County public schools. I taught there for 7 years, mostly in fifth grade, a little bit in sixth grade. And the whole time I taught there, the whole time I've been teaching, I've always believed that learning should be an active endeavor, but I felt more like I was just pouring knowledge into kids, and it was much less active than I really wanted when I was teaching those first 7 years. Then I came to PK Young about 10 years ago, and in that process, I began to transform my work into from a teacher-centered to a student-centered way of thinking and way of working, and it much more matched my beliefs. And in that time, I also started learning about self-regulated learning, and beyond just having student-centered learning, is really teaching kids to actually own their own learning, to really give them strategies to do that. So in that process, I had to figure out, though, how do you actually do that? How do you teach kids to do that? So within my time here at PK, I've done some inquiry projects. I've also already earned my educational specialist in educational technology and curriculum and instruction. And through that process, I worked on a couple of different inquiry projects, one of them working with one middle school student, kind of a case study, and really looking at what he's thinking, and really discovered that he really wasn't thinking about a lot of this stuff. He really wasn't metacognitive about his learning at all. And then I also did a second one that looked more at a small group, and I actually was trying to teach them some of those things and actually train them a little bit around some of the self-regulated learning processes. And what I really came out of that one learning is that even though they were starting to be more metacognitive about it and they were able to goal set, which is really what I was focusing on, they weren't able to follow through. They set goals and then they wouldn't actually work on them. And so both of those really put me into a place of trying to figure out how to look at the whole process of self-regulated learning. So during the dissertation process, what does that look like? Well, the first thing is this idea of the media versus methods debate, and that really hit me right in the face right there at the beginning of this process of what does it really mean, and what does Clark really mean, and what does Cosma really mean, and where do I fit? Do I fit more on this idea that it really doesn't matter what you do, that it's about pedagogy, which I definitely believe, that's more on the Clark side, or does media really matter? Is it so ingrained in the work itself that you can't pull it out? And I kind of believe that too. So I'm not really sure still where I am on that side of the debate. I think I might be more on Cosmo's side. And then really thinking through these philosophical or psychological, underpinnings of all of this stuff that when I first started this project, or this process, I probably would have a visceral reaction to behaviorism. I've always thought of it as something that was very 1960s, and very extrinsic motivation is not something that I've thought of as being something that I want to be. I know that there's a lot of teachers like that, but that's not the kind of teacher I want to be. On the flip side, I was not a constructivist either. This always seemed very theoretical and flowery mumbo jumbo that yeah, that's great, this idea, but that doesn't work in the real world. I was always sort of more in the middle, and I do think cognitivism kind of is there, where it's teacher led, but it can be student centered, and that you're really working on what's going on in kids' minds. And I kind of feel like that's really where Cosmo was too. That's kind of where I side there, is that Clark and this idea of behaviorism, and if you can't see it, you can't measure it, it doesn't exist, that kind of thing. And Cosmo, I feel like, is more on this cognitive side of what's going on. The process is really important. And that's kind of the same thing when we were analyzing the studies in our quals, that they were really looking at, is it the pedagogy, is it the process that really drives this whole thing? And I kind of think that both studies found that, and that kind of goes back to the media methods debate as well, of this idea of is the technology really making a difference, or is it really just the pedagogy? And I think both of the studies kind of found that it was the pedagogy more than the technology that really made the difference. And so I kind of feel like that all just jams up in there together into this idea of how do you design a study about educational technology if the technology doesn't really matter? So how can you make the technology such a part of it that it can't be pulled apart? So ultimately, I land here. This idea of the pragmatist, that who cares where you land? Let's just do something that works. And I feel like that's kind of what I tried to do in my when I designed the fractions unit in my paper. That it was really, I kind of presented it as three very different things, and you could do this or this or this, but really in reality, I'd probably do all three. I'd have those bits and pieces where you really do have to just know this, and then these other parts where we're really focusing on your thinking, and then these other parts where we're building it and really building your understanding. I think they're all important, and I think you've got to encompass them all and also pay attention to the kids that are in front of you. That said, looking at my study, where am I really wanting to go? Well, first of all, really focusing in on the regulated learning part first, and this idea of the three parts, the forethought, performance, and reflection. But like breaking down like what parts of that would we really focus on? Well, in my research, what I've realized is that the forethought phase, there's goal setting, but self-efficacy is also a big part of that, of like, how do you feel about your ability to do something? And that affects your ability to set the goal for it. Because if you feel like you can do it, then you're going to set the goal. If you don't feel like you can do it, you can't set the goal. So really focusing on how can self-efficacy affect the forethought phase. The performance phase, I really want to start focusing on help-seeking behaviors. That's something that came up in the research of like teaching kids, like as they're focusing on what they're working on, or how are they figuring out what they need help with, and how are they getting that help, and what are the behaviors, and can we actually give students strategies for those behaviors? And then in the self-reflection, really doing some self-evaluation, like really giving them some tools for self-evaluation. There's some research around giving kids prompts really pushes that forward. So that's sort of, this is really Zimmerman's conceptual framework here. And then also knowing, though, that all three of these phases can happen in cognition, they can happen in motivation, they can happen in behavior. And so you kind of have to be paying attention to all three. You can just focus on one or the other, but they're all going to happen. So you kind of have to be aware of that. I think I'm going to be mostly focusing more on the cognition. Just really quickly to explain the context. So I am moving schools next year, and I'm a little bit fuzzy about the whole context of my new job, but I'm going to be an instructional coach. And I know it's the K4 science specialist. I'm pretty comfortable about what's going on in his room, but I've chosen to focus on specifically on the fourth grade science project. So this is sort of the overall what they're going to do. They'll choose a topic, they'll choose and research a topic that they want to work on. They want to find out something about, and like different kids might pick different topics. And then they have to create a proposal, and that proposal is about what they're actually going to do, to design the project, but they also have to like put in an order form. These are the things we're going to need. I mean, it's a comprehensive thing. Like they have to like list out the whole thing. And then they have to set up and conduct an experiment. And then they have to report on the results of the project. And then they have to seek feedback from experts in the field. So they can't just say, this is what we found. They have to then send that to somebody in whatever field from the topic that they chose and say, this is what we found. Can you read this and give us feedback on how we did with the whole project? And then they incorporate that feedback in a final report. And there's some technology involved in the everyday, as far as some Google apps, but then also using PBWorks as a place to house their projects, their final products. And so that's where it is right now. That may change as we move forward, but that's the general idea. One of these cycles is what I'm wanting to look at. And within that, I'm wanting to look at, again, self-efficacy in terms of the forethought. Like, so how are kids feeling about what they're doing affecting their help-seeking behaviors in the actual performance phase, and then some self-evaluation. So it's social emotional learning. There is a core social emotional learning component at the school. So looking at that and how does that affect student self-efficacy when it comes to this science project, and possibly finding a way to measure that. And then when they're actually working on the project, the technology will come into play with PBWorks and Google Apps. And within that, looking at the help-seeking behaviors. So advantageous help-seeking behaviors, meaning you need help and you seek it out appropriately. I'm interested in those, but also these detrimental help-seeking behaviors. So the first one, you need help, but you don't seek it. That's the most obvious one. But also you don't need help, but you seek it anyway, which can be an issue, right? And then on the back end of looking at the reflection, the questions that I'm giving them to help them reflect. So that's the general setup of my conceptual framework based upon what those kids are doing, based upon all of this idea of pulling in and trying to be pragmatic around all of the different components of behaviorism, cognitivism, constructivism, and really focusing on incorporating the media and as a part of the PBWorks and the Google Apps in a way that it is integral to the project as a whole. And that's my project.